What is a podcast network, and how can an after-hours entrepreneur become part of a podcast network?
Well, the problem is you have to have an enormous amount of downloads. I don't think they'll even talk to you unless you have 15,000 downloads per episode. If you're beneath that, you have to just be super clever and kind of figure out how to do it on your own.
How can me as a podcaster actually get the media to care?
Do you have anybody interesting? Do you have anything that's newsworthy? Because if it's just like Mary McGee talking about her book about knitting, that's not really anything they care about. It's really about finding somebody who's newsworthy and they're saying something that's timely and that can be tied into a story.
Kate Casey is an expert podcast host interviewing some of the biggest celebrities you've ever seen on TV. Over 4.5 thousand, that's 4.5 thousand five-star reviews on her podcast, Reality Life with Kate. Kate, thank you so much for being here. Kate Casey in the house. How are you doing today?
I'm great. It's good to see you. I always hear you, and now it's good to see you.
Right? We met in Clubhouse, which is a fantastic place to greet people, but you don't get to see faces. We don't get to see those brilliant, beautiful, lively, smiling faces. So it's great to see you face to face today.
You too.
Awesome. So I can't wait to get all of your insider secrets on how to grow your podcast. 4.5 thousand reviews. That's just insane. I can't wait to get into that. Before we get into that, we were just kind of chatting before the episode here. 5 kids. You got 5 kids. Mm-hmm. What's it like being a mompreneur, producing a great show and having 5 kids? What's the biggest struggle you have?
Oh my God, I hate the name mompreneur. It just sounds like somebody with like, I don't know, like a bracelet business or something. I don't know. Listen, it's hard. It's juggling, but I went to a boarding school for high school for underprivileged children, but I lived in a student home with 16 girls, and from 9th through 12th grade. And then I went to college and I lived in a dorm. I think I'm just really comfortable and used to being around a lot of people. I like a lot of noise. I like to have a television on in the background or something to listen to. I like frenetic, chaotic energy because I feel like the crazier things go, the more zen I get. So I don't know. It's not for everybody, but we really like having a big family. Well, although everybody thinks we're in a cult, but we're not.
Well, I should hope, although families can sometimes be that way. But I like this idea, Kate, of embracing the chaos and knowing yourself, being true to yourself. It's really easy to say, okay, this is what John Smith or Jane Smith is doing. I got to do that too to be successful. But for me, I think it's just knowing yourself and what your vision is. I mean, I think that's incredibly powerful. I mean, speaking of which, how important do you think it is for a podcaster to insert their personality into their show? How important is that?
Well, I kind of think it's different for everybody. It depends on what show you're in, what you have. You know, I'm not sure how, I mean, I think you have to calibrate it for your audience. If you're talking about business, maybe a little bit. If it's journalistic, you should not have any part of your personality pretty much. The space that I'm in, I think it's really important. So, I just think that you have to kind of follow your gut instinct. But ultimately, if you're going to be a podcast host, it should be something that you would want to talk about for 40 hours straight and not skip a beat. So inevitably, if you're talking about something that you really care about, your personality will shine through. But I think that, you know, if you have a podcast where you're interviewing people, you have to have a good balance of showing your personality, but really making it more about the guest.
Oh, I like that, making it about the guest. So I definitely want to go deeper into that. But another thing you had kind of mentioned is, you know, actually getting into the space from the first part, right? I know a lot of people that are getting into podcasting, they join for different reasons. I'd love to hear from you. Podcast Reality Life with Kate Casey now has millions and millions of listens, all these 5-star reviews. Why did you actually get started in this space? Why did you get started?
My background is media consulting for global law firms. When I started to have children, I had always wanted to pursue comedy. So while I was working and just before I started to have kids, I started taking improv comedy classes. And then when I had my first child, I started writing on the side to kind of fill that space. and I would do funny recaps of reality shows. So I think one of the first shows I started writing about was Real Housewives of Orange County, because I lived in Orange County, but I was an outsider from Philadelphia. So I kind of, what people would call now fan fiction, I would recap it, but include conversations that never happened, over the top descriptions. And it was kind of got a cult following. So because of that, I started getting asked to go on podcasts just to ask me about my perspective of those shows. But I'm actually like a savant when it comes to unscripted TV. I'm a person who has watched an enormous amount of TV and documentaries, and I have a photographic memory. So the more I started doing these interviews, I thought, oh gosh, I would love to have a show of my own where I could track down people that had been on reality shows years and years ago and find out how it changed the trajectory of their life. But structure a show kind of like a television show. Like I'm a Johnny Carson with an opening, a featured guest, a second guest, and a closing. And the second guest was typically somebody who I would pluck from obscurity, or maybe it was a comedian or somebody. And I would force them, as I would say, to watch a reality show and to hear their perspective. So it's basically like a love letter for TV. And the show has really kind of stayed that way, although under the unscripted umbrella, I'm really doing reality shows, docuseries, and documentaries, which, in Hollywood, you've got scripted, meaning sitcoms or fiction movies, and an unscripted is shows that have like a loose format, but it's really about the conversations that they have that is unscripted. So that was almost 5 years ago, and I eventually stopped doing media consulting for law firms and just focused solely on this. And so it's been a wild ride. And what I think is cool about my story is it's a second chapter. So, I could have I was really good at my first job, but I didn't have the passion for it anymore. And this is something that I really cared about. And I think that the skills that I gained from the first chapter job in working with law firms and working with reporters every day has helped me tremendously in shaping the interviewer that I am for my show today.
I think that's really interesting. So you're leveraging the skills, the expertise, and maybe even the connections that you had built previously to, let's face it, law, not very fun, not very exciting, right?
Actually, it actually was pretty fun, at least for me, because I was a news junkie and I studied political science and an intern at the White House. And then I started working with lawyers who for some of them had been senators that had gone back to their law firms. So for me, it was kind of a fun challenge, because I would meet with a law firm or a lawyer and they'd say, this is my practice. How can you get me more exposure? So it was kind of this great challenge. So if I had a white collar crime attorney, I'd say, all right, George, no one really knows about your practice, but let me see what I can do. And then I would figure out really clever ways to get them in front of potential clients or current clients by getting them into really great press. So for example, when the Martha Stewart trial happened, I made this guy, George, the go-to expert on the ramifications of the Martha Stewart trial. And he got everywhere. He was on TV. He was in Wall Street Journal. He was in New York Times. And, it was really fun to see someone who was at like a mid-level firm and really working hard, trying to compete for the attention of general counsel against people who worked at much bigger firms. And with my help, it almost leveled the playing field, because all of a sudden that person is quoted in the news all the time, and general counsels are like, well, that must be the best person to go to because he's quoted everywhere. So it was really quite fun, and I really enjoyed working with attorneys. Listen, a lot of people, they're hard asses, but so am I. And it was, I really kind of riffed well with a lot of these attorneys who were just sort of type A people. I'm from Philadelphia, and I'm a very direct person, and I'm a hustler. So it was kind of fun. And I like getting the respect of some 50, 60-year-old lawyer was pretty cool. One guy was like, you're kind of my life coach, Kate, because I'd be like, look, you're a disaster. Like, no one's ever going to hire you. Look at yourself, which was great because I was an outside consultant. I wasn't in-house. So that allowed me to probably be a little bit more upfront. But, I loved that job for a long time because it allowed me to basically read the news all day. And I love that. I would much rather listen to a news program than listen to music. So it was really fun, but I had always had this pang for the entertainment industry. So when I was a kid, I had these like 3 buckets that I wanted to get into, and it was like news/politics, comedy and entertainment, and sports. And so I filled that first bucket, which was the news politics. This is the entertainment bucket. And the sports part I can still do because as the show has changed and adapted to the upsurge in interest in docuseries and documentaries, I got to interview Michael Jordan's biographer about The Last Dance on ESPN. I got to interview the executive producer and director of Tiger and the biographer of Tiger Woods documentary. So I do get to kind of get that part of my life fulfilled because I get to riff about all these really cool unscripted shows and series and documentaries with people who are the go-to experts. So in the first chapter, if I had an attorney who specialized in securities, I would download everything I could about securities law. And then I could hang. I mean, I know a little bit about a lot of things because of that job. And now in this job, I feel like you could talk to me about almost any topic and I can reference some sort of show or documentary and keep the conversation going. So it is sort of an extension of the first job. But like I said, I just think that you carry with you, it's just like adding things to your backpack. Like what you take from one job leads to the next job, to the next job.
I mean, it sounds to me like you were trying to fulfill that curiosity, right?
Yeah, I would say that. Yeah, I'm an infinitely curious person, which I think is a strength of mine and something that I really instill in my kids. I'm always like, if you go to someone's house, I want you to come back and tell me 2 interesting things about them. Always pursue the questions and the answers that no one else has come up with. Like, it's really important to really care about other people and what's going on in the world. And I think that if people get a little bit too comfortable in their own little bubble, they're really doing a disservice to themselves and others.
Yes. I mean, I think the last thing you want to do right now is get comfortable. The world is changing so quickly. I was actually just on an interview with someone who runs a magazine. She's like, I had to evolve my magazine, not just from paper, but to digital, to podcasting, to video content. Like, if you're getting comfortable right now, I don't know what to tell you. You're just not going to be able to keep up with what's happening next. So I want to lean a little bit more into the growth of your podcast itself. A lot of after hours entrepreneurs have podcasts. They want to grow their podcast. They're looking for different ways to grow that podcast, myself included, right? Like, I want to grow it. And one of the ways that we can do that is by bringing on these well-known celebrity guests. You get that halo effect. I'd love to hear from you, Kate. Who was that first big guest that came on your show that it was just like, bing, the heavens shone down from above? Who was that first big guest that you were really excited about?
Well, I have to say that my first guest I ever had was a girl who had been on Bachelor. It was The Bachelor. And she was known as this girl that would cry all the time. She was like a disaster on TV. She was like a walking meme. And that was my first guest. And that was a big get right out of the gates. And it's funny because she said, your recaps of The Bachelor are so funny. I have to come on. And then after that, she started a podcast. I'm like, of course she did. So, I was kind of like in front of the line. Like I was like an early adopter to podcast in my space. So I actually had a great guest right out of the gate. There have been so many incredible guests. I don't even know who the first... I don't even remember anymore who the first person was. But there have been so many where I'm like... I kind of get really giddy about how sometimes I land people and I'm like, oh my God, you forget when you're in the heat of things, like in the daily grind. When you're in the grind, you don't really pay attention. But then I know people often say to me, like, I cannot believe the amazing guests you got. Like, I could have somebody from Real Housewives and then the next episode I'll have Amanda Knox. It's like, what?
Well, I want to know more about this first guest because most people don't start off their podcast getting people on TV. And you already had a blog that was kind of established, right?
Yeah, I think that. Yeah. Now, I have to say, too, I pitched my show to a network. That was my first foray into podcasting. I went to the Wondery Network and said, I have this great idea for a show. And they were like, all right, what is it? I said, and I gave the whole pitch about reality TV. And they said, are you sure that people care about reality TV? Now, what you should know now is that there are like 13,000 reality TV podcasts. And
Wow.
so as I started, my friends Watch What Crappens, they did reviews of Bravo shows. And my friend Heather McDonald from Juicy Scoop, she would once in a while do interviews with people who happened to be on reality shows. But mine was really the first one where it was fully dedicated to interviews with people on reality shows. And now I can't even tell you how many there are. So it's just kind of funny because they were like, are you sure? And that network at the time was a little bit more cerebral programming. So they were like, reality shows? Okay. So my first episode, and I want you to know that when I looked at the pod metrics, I felt like dog shit. I was like, oh my God, I remember turning to my audio engineer and saying, how am I going to get people to listen to the show? I had 2,000 downloads on my first episode.
Whoa.
That's pretty damn good. But
yeah.
I just thought, how in the world is it, like, how am I going to get people to listen to this?
But you did this on your own. You didn't collaborate with the network for this first show, right? Because they didn't understand.
They didn't really know. They didn't understand at all. They were like, huh? So no, the onus was totally on me too. But I had already had that blog. And sometimes I look back and I think it was almost easier in the beginning because I was so unusual that I think I piqued people's interest because it was like, oh, a show, just reality TV interviews. Like, oh, that's interesting. And as the markets become more saturated, it almost becomes more tricky as time goes on, how to differentiate yourself and keep people interested. So that's the weird part about it. So yeah, I've always been with a network. Now I'm on another network now, but for me, to be really honest, is that even though you can have a network, like I have always done everything myself. All the guest swaps. I've had a team that does my advertising, yes, but the marketing and PR and the booking, I have done myself my whole time in this job for 5 years now. Every person you hear on my show is someone that I booked. All the research, I'm watching all the shows, I'm doing all the writing. I have an audio engineer that helps me splice it together, and I give him edit notes, and then he uploads it. But you know, the other whole work, I'm just amused at when I interview somebody or someone contacts me. Well, I have a new show. I have about 4 episodes, and my team will reach out to you. I'm like, your team? Like, you just started. Like, what? Like, I don't have this team. So it is doable. You can do it. For me, one of the frustrations I have, and there was a Guardian article out this morning, and I'm so grateful that they wrote it because it's an ongoing frustration, is that I'm somewhere kind of in the middle where there are so many new podcasts. There are 2 million podcasts out now. Yeah. And I'm part of the point, like 0.05% or something, like the top level. But the top level is like all, you know, the Kate Hudsons of the world and the Bruce Springsteens and the Barack Obamas, who have this huge platform across the world in the, you know, because they were a politician or they made movies or whatever, or they are already a CEO and then they start a show and they get a ton of downloads. And then they're like the next big thing. They're never really all that consistent with the shows. But so for those of us in that kind of space, we're competing against those numbers. I've never been on a television show. So I have to compete now for guests alongside now a celebrity. Another weird thing in my space is that, as I said, I was the first person to kind of come up with this template of like interviews with reality shows or people from reality shows. And while it was weird because in the beginning, I could get guests. And then there was a period of time where it was like, it was getting harder. It was because I think in the beginning, the networks were like, what is this platform? Sure, why not go do it? But then they realized that some people would sit down and really spill their guts to me. I've been called the Diane Sawyer of reality TV. So then they were like, oh, I don't know. Like, we want to keep that content for our platform and not hers. So then there was like a dip where it was really hard to get guests. And now it's just a matter of, you know, you're competing against a former reality star who then started a podcast. So they have the audience already. And then maybe their friend wants to go to their show. So the long and short of it is there's always some sort of complication or hurdle that you have to face. And this is 5 years into the game.
Well, I 100% agree with you there. And just because you have a big name doesn't mean you have a good podcast, right?
Right.
It takes time to actually learn how to execute a show that people are interested in. I want to back up to something that you just talked about, Kate, which I think could be very helpful to all the after hours entrepreneurs. Tell us, how can an after hours, well, let's back it up. What is a podcast network, and how can an after hours entrepreneur become part of a podcast network?
Well, the problem is you have to have an enormous amount of downloads. I don't think they'll even talk to you unless you have 15,000 downloads per episode. And that's just not a reality for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. So I think that if you're beneath that, you have to just be super clever and kind of figure out how to do it on your own. I mean, if you're on a network, they are going to take, a cut of it from your advertising sales. But the great thing is you don't have to deal with that whole headache of,
because they're going to be negotiating.
Just because, if you're booking and researching, that's just another thing on your plate. So know that there's, going to be a small cut from that. And you have to be very, very careful about going with a network where you maintain all your IP. So, it's unfortunately, I hear people on Clubhouse all the time claiming that they make so much money off their podcast. And I'm like, I just don't believe that. Some crazy person was like, oh, I just had a check cut for $26,000. I'm like, stop lying to people. Stop lying, because brands don't care about you unless you have a certain amount of downloads per episode. It's just the way it works. But I understand that, somebody will say something and people kind of go, oh, okay, there's opportunity there. But it is a very difficult space to be in. I'm always amused at people who are like, oh, I'll just start a podcast. I'm like, well, okay, you're going to realize it's a lot of work. So you just have to be super consistent. And it's kind of, you have to just keep hustling to get the next big guest. For me, it's like, who's the next big guest? And then you could have a show and you're going to interview somebody that's really big, but like, are you going to ask all the same questions they've been asked every single show? Right. And another thing that's kind of interesting is that sometimes when you get the big guest, they're not going to even share the show because they're narcissists, or they didn't like the picture you used, or maybe it was like a busy day for them. But sometimes it's the other people that are the least you'd expect who promote it the most, and you get the most downloads. So something I think did when it comes to,
so I think you're about to lead into what I wanted to ask you about, right? Because I think, at least for a lot of podcasters, they overwhelm their guests with too many links or too much information. Guilty of that, by the way, to an extent. What are some techniques that you've had success with in actually getting these people to share your show?
So I think something I did that was really smart was that by layering my episodes, I was like let's say in one episode, in the beginning, I have 3 guests in one episode, like a talk show. And that's I'm promoting on my socials, and then you have a huge TV star, and then you have somebody in a totally different industry. I would make somebody who was a national hockey league player watch a show on, The Bachelor or Bravo or something. And so that hockey player is then promoting that he was on a show about reality shows, talking about his like deep secret love of Vanderpump Rules. He's promoting it to an audience comprised of hockey fans. And then also in the same episode, I have a girl who was a contestant on blah, blah, blah. She's promoting it on her socials. So in one episode, I have my guests are basically working as my team.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So I did that from the beginning. And I think that has been very, very helpful. I think guest swapping's been helpful. I've always contacted the media with sound bites of my shows. I've had my show written about many, many, many times, and that's me pitching it.
So I really want to dig in deeper on this.
Media is a huge component of my show. Yeah,
I want to dig into this a little bit. How can me as a podcaster actually get the media to care about what I'm producing?
Do you have anybody interesting? Do you have anything that's newsworthy? Because if it's just like Mary McGee talking about her book about knitting, that's not really anything they care about. But I've always been very And because of my first chapter job, I know what the media is looking for in terms of a story. So I'm trying to get in front of a story, break a story. I'm trying to get a soundbite from somebody on a show that the media cover. Like, I interviewed this guy from a show called Shaws of Sunset. Okay, whatever. It's like a group of friends. But I knew that he grew up in LA. And so anyway, we're interviewing him, and you're just kind of like getting to know the person. I think his story is very interesting. And then he mentions that he went to school with Meghan Markle. And then I was like, wait, what? Get out of here. Like, oh, you knew her? And then he said, oh, yeah, she was just such a flirt, and everyone was in love with her. And then she used to, flirt with me. And he gave this story about it. And I was like, oh, this is so great. Like this, because to me, that's what I would want to hear at a dinner party.
Yeah.
Like I'm sitting with somebody and they're like, yeah, I'm on the show. And, I went to school with Meghan Markle. I'll be like, what? Tell me everything. You went to school with Meghan Markle? Tell me everything. So he shared this story and it went it went bananas. Like I got press all over the place because it's the story about this mysterious woman that people think they know, but they don't really know. And so he was giving us a window into her world. That was fantastic. So that's what's going to get your new media when you get someone interesting that talks about something that, I just had somebody yesterday talking about Meghan and the royals and the royal family. That's going to get you more media than, somebody who's a life coach. No one gives a shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You got to get something that's timely and newsworthy. And frankly, not a lot of podcasts have that kind of stuff. So that's kind of, there are clever ways to do it. And, I'm always happy to give people advice on, what I kind of think might spurk their media interest. But it's really about finding somebody who's newsworthy and they're saying something that's timely and that can be tied into a story.
And also to your point, something that's maybe never been said before, right? Big name, trendy, something new.
And yes, and I think that over time people have been kind of like, why would you do a show about reality shows? Obviously, but it's timely all the time.
Yeah.
All the time. Like I did the Royal Correspondent because the series on Apple TV with Oprah and Prince Harry is like one of the highest downloaded series right now. That's what people are talking about this week. So I think I'm really, really good at figuring out what people are going to be talking about next week. Another good thing I do is I put out a list every week of what to watch. So I'm telling people heads up, this is what you want to watch. So it's two things. I'm getting in front of the story because I'm warning people I'm going to do something about this next episode because this is the top of the mind, or I'm convincing people watch this because I want to talk about it next week. And so I have networks that have told me that I've been really, really helpful in getting promotion of some of their shows. So that's a great part too, is that I've cultivated relationships with television networks because they kind of see me, they do see me as a partner. I'm helping promote their talent and their shows.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I love that. I love that. And listen, we're talking to Kate Casey here from Reality Life with Kate Casey. She's giving away all her secrets. And I love this. I just, so much great stuff here. And you can listen to her podcast, Reality Life with Kate Casey. You can join her Facebook group for more information, Reality Life with Kate Casey. And you can join her Patreon to take the next level to get those extra excerpts, those extra episodes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I want to talk.
The Patreon too is great because for podcasters, you might just talk about one topic, but for me, I could talk about a million things. So my Patreon's great because I can deep dive true crime cases, or I love cases having to do with social issues with the aristocracy. I'm going to do a Patreon episode today about Silicon Valley executives and how they're microdosing. Wow. Yeah,
I'm
cool
intrigued.
Stuff. Yeah, it's very. So
I do want to go a little bit into this, Kate. And the way we have an over/under section, overrated, underrated section, which I'd love to. But just real quickly, how do you structure a Patreon page? I think this is a common question. How can I create more content? How can I create content that people are actually interested in? How do you structure your Patreon?
I think there are people that probably do a way better job than I do. My friend Heather McDonald is a great Patreon page with different tiers, and you get extra for this, and then I'm a real easy girl. I just have a flat fee. I'm like, you pay a subscription and you just get a bunch of cool extra episodes. And again, I almost always have a guest and we'll riff. So, I've had people who, So for me, like I reach out and I'll do crossover Patreon episodes with people who have great Instagram accounts in my space, and then we'll riff about different shows we're watching, or some of them we even go into race on reality shows and kind of deep dive. I'm always kind of looking at shows from an anthropological perspective, so that's the nice thing about the crossover episodes, is that I get to really deep dive with people that are in my space but are maybe not podcasters. So I get to know them better too.
Because I would think if I'm going to be a guest on your show, I want to reach as many people as possible. Do people like say, well, you're just going to bring me onto your Patreon? Like, I'm not going to reach the audience that I'd want to reach. Has that ever been a problem in bringing on guests?
No, because it's also just a great way to cultivate a relationship. So it's almost like we're having coffee, as if we were meeting up for coffee, but by doing it by Zoom or whatever. Because some, they live in other parts of the country, and it's just extra content for people that listen to my show who probably are also consuming their Instagrams or their podcast or whatever. No, I mean, I've worked really hard in the last 5 years to establish myself as a thought leader in this space. So I think, people like to just really build connections with people in their space.
Interesting. Your network is your net worth, as this saying goes. Your network is your net worth.
And I know that people would tell you, Mark, Kate really goes out of her way to help other people. I really do. I believe it deep in my bones. I'm always helping other people. I'm connecting other people. I'm sharing episodes that other people do in my Facebook group. I'm always encouraging people. If you love another podcast, feel free to talk about it, because I feel like sharing information resources help grow the market. And I think the universe repays people that help other people out. I'm going to know things that people are going to spend 4 years trying to figure out. Why wouldn't I share that information and help them? Because invariably, I do get screwed over sometimes, but like most of the time, people are so grateful for the help that I give. And I'm proud to say I have a very, people in my space know that I will help other people, and they're grateful for it.
I live by the same, that concept of karma. And I'm with you there. If you're getting into podcasting just to make $1 million, it's not the right motivation. Go into podcasting because you're going to deliver something that people actually want and they need. I think it was you who said this. You're on fire and I have the fire hose to put you out, right?
Your house is on fire and I'm the only one who has the hose.
That's it. Yep. That's it. That
but
might
also,
be the name of the episode.
I've always looked at podcasting as a stepping stone to other things. Yeah. So, for me, I'm cultivating these great relationships with networks, and it's been great because I'll interview people who are network executives or producers, and they'll say, oh my gosh, you know so much about unscripted TV. The people who actually make it are like, wow, you really know a lot. And so now I'm moving into this other kind of additional chapter of my life where I'm becoming a producer. So I think that that's been the wonderful thing about working in the space. If I had been somebody who had worked in media consulting for global law firms, and then at age whatever, I said, I'm going to try to work in TV. I'm going to produce a TV show. It would have been near impossible, but I've really been working hard to establish myself as a thought leader and really build those relationships that matter. And I think I'm really good after 5 years in knowing what people are going to watch. I know because people rely on me. They're like, what do I watch this week?
Well, you're definitely doing something right, because millions of downloads, over 4,500 5-star reviews. It's bananas. It's bonkers. It's Kate Casey from Reality Life with Kate Casey. So Kate, before I let you go, I got to get we're going to get you to say something you never said before, and it's going to be in the overrated, underrated section. Are you ready to rock?
Okay, good. Yeah.
Okay. Overrated, underrated, TikTok.
I think it has its moments for all things. I'm going to go with overrated because I like podcasts because it's long form, and TikTok annoys me because it's just not that much. But, my daughter thinks it's the greatest thing that ever happened, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's the bee's knees for the younger generation, and we'll see.
But remember when people said that about Snapchat, and then I knew all these women that were like Instagram mommy bloggers, and now their kids grew up and they have nothing. nothing to do now. Or they're like out of that space. And it's like, okay, I just spent hours and hours of my life, curating pictures where I'm like holding an umbrella and what came out of it? Because people were like, oh, Instagram, like if you're not big on Instagram, like it's it for you. And it's like, okay. And now everyone's everybody has a podcast. I'm sure after podcasts will move into something else too. All these things kind of come and go, and you have to strike the iron while it's hot.
Yeah, and keep trying new things. Pat Flynn, I spoke with on a previous episode, 80% of his time is doing what's working, 20% is experimenting, and I think that's really smart. Okay,
yeah,
overrated, underrated.
True. That's true.
Overrated, underrated, watermelon.
Overrated. I don't eat fruit.
Don't eat fruit?
No.
Okay, overrated, underrated, carrots.
It depends on what it's in.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. You sound like my daughter a little bit. I'll give her some carrots and she's like,
I'm a pain. I'm such a pain in the ass about stuff like that.
Overrated, underrated, Jersey Shore.
Now it's overrated. At its peak, it was underrated, but now it's a little bit too old. I don't think that people want to see most of them, getting wasted anymore. I don't know if people care about who they are now. I think they were more excited about who they were then, and because that show, like many shows, people enjoy because there's an element of, I want to think back to who I was at that age, where I didn't have to worry about bills and children and stresses of life. I could just go and get wasted and hang out with my friends all day and use a duck phone to call my booty call like that. But once they grow older, people just get really, it's kind of depressing. And I think the Vanderpump Rules show is another example of that. There were a ton of men that would tell me all the time that was one of their favorite shows. And it was because there were a lot of men in there on that show who would go to Vegas with their buddies and just be wasted. And it was like, I remember what that was like. But now they're still doing that and they're older. It's kind of like, it's a buzzkill.
That's interesting. It's that living vicariously type
experience
that reality TV gives you.
But the audience grows older and evolves.
Yeah.
And sometimes that talent doesn't evolve, and then it becomes depressing.
Yeah, interesting. Overrated, underrated, video podcasting.
Overrated, because the problem is that it doesn't always factor into pod metrics. So you're not getting credit for the download, and that's kind of sucks. Also, as an interviewer, people really hate to be videotaped. And it sometimes presents a problem because, well, at least in my space, it's a lot of very vain people. So I'm asking a very thoughtful question, and they're more focused on, like, how does my hair look? And then it's distracting them. I want someone to totally feel like they're so at ease and they're thinking about every question, and the video sometimes complicates it.
Well, that's an interesting point. I'm huge on video, obviously. It's what I kind of preach. YouTube has been pretty big for me as well, 600,000 views up to this point. But it does lead to me. It leads to a lot of challenges in marketing. Like, do I want to lead people to my podcast or do I want to lead people to my YouTube channel? And it's a little complex. Okay. Overrated, underrated Clubhouse.
I think I'm still trying to figure it out because I do feel like I've met some really interesting people, but I also think there are a lot of imposters on there. And that wastes people's time. I'm eager to see how it evolves. At the moment, it's kind of great because you have a smaller group of people using it, and you can really get a sense of, you can really build some substantial relationships. But then as it gets bigger, is that still possible? I don't know. And I think that in the beginning of it, I definitely felt like I was getting new listeners because, I was reaching new people, but I just don't know if over time, if that's sustainable.
I mean, just like everything, there's an ebb and flow, right? Instagram. Right. And interesting point. I will say that every time I'm hosting a room, if you're going to be on Clubhouse, you got to be creating, got to be hosting. Okay. Final question here.
You have to be talking. That's the thing too. You have to be talking, moderating. So you have to really put yourself out there. And if you're kind of like a wallflower, it's not meant for you because I'm just like, what's the point of just sitting and listening all the time. I'm too much of an extrovert. I need to like be stimulated, engaging.
Well said. Well said. Okay. Final question here for you, Kate. If you had 10 seconds with yourself 10 years ago, what would you say?
I don't know. I think most people will tell you, I would say, don't be so hard on yourself. I would be like, yeah, get your shit together. Keep moving. Like, hustle your ass off, because there are people behind you that will take your spot. My mom was like that. I mean, if there was like a Pulitzer Prize winner, she'd be like, somebody's going to write a better book than you. Like, she's very much like that. And I think that's very instilled in me, is that be the first person to get to work and the last to leave. Like, work harder than anybody else. So I wouldn't change that about myself. Maybe wear more sunscreen. I don't know.
Wear more sunscreen?
I don't know. I just think, I don't
It's
know.
impossible for me to get sunscreen on my kids, by the way. I don't know if you suffer that problem, but it is like impossible.
Spray's that's the best route. Yeah. I know, because we're pale. But I married a guy who's Portuguese, so he doesn't understand. He's so annoying. He's like, oh, I went outside for 5 minutes today. Now I have a glowing tan. I'm like, please. And I've had like Mohs surgery to get a basal cell off me. I don't know. I don't know. That Clubhouse is full of life coaches, isn't it?
Yeah, and TikTok. I get all of my stock and Bitcoin advice from 12-year-olds on TikTok.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh, for sure. I know. I want to make a TikTok video where I'm dancing, and then it's just like, when they point to things, and it's just like blah, 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 blah.
You got to make sure you're standing. You got to be standing on a boat with a Lamborghini, though. That's important.
Oh, for sure. But isn't it amazing? I was just thinking this yesterday, that in the year 2021, that so many people think that they're life coaches. It's insane. I mean, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, the reality is, the reality is just focus on being a little bit better than yesterday, and just try to help people.
Everybody's working. Everyone's working. Everyone's trying.
Yeah. Don't extract money from people. Provide value to people. I think that's really the way I see it. But
yeah.
Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, you've been listening to Reality Life Star podcast host Kate Casey, bringing the heat. Kate, thanks for helping me and all the After Hours Entrepreneurs.
I want to know where is your wife? Because I always feel like in Clubhouse, you're like, guys, got to wrap this up. My wife's like, what's going on?
It's being married is tough, but it's to me, it's all about communication. And she knows, 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, like we're going all in. And then we do, I don't know if you do this as well. We actually chart out specific time during the week where it's just me and her. No kids, no cell phones, just her and I. And I think that's been really, really important.
Yeah, we do a date night every Saturday night. Yeah, we definitely do that. Yeah, but we have 5, so it's kind of hard to escape them. But yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's important too.
You got to make time for the things that really matter to you, because if you don't, it's going to be gone. It's going to be gone.
Yeah, true.
Kate Casey, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm glad you enjoyed this episode. I've got several other episodes right here for you. Smash one of these videos to make sure that you don't miss out on the tips, tools, and tactics of industry experts. Let's take that side hustle full time. Smash one of these links.